Hi, Ken Dabbs here, providing an overview of the concept of community of memory from Chapter 8's topic of organization communication ethics. As communicators exploring the topic of ethical communications, what is our responsibility for understanding and supporting community of memory in organizational communications? That's what we will attempt to address with a three-pronged approach, beginning with understanding community of memory as an organization communication ethics practice. I'll then introduce a scholarly article to deepen and expand our understanding. And then last, we'll provide a preview of a clip from President Obama's 2015 Selma speech on the 50th Bloody Sunday at Edmund Pettus Bridge, Alabama. Before we begin to talk about community of memory, we'll review the concept of dwelling place. Dwelling place is organizational life takes on characteristics of a particular type of dwelling, a particular home for communicative practices. It's like a neighborhood that has all types of homes with all shapes and sizes. Different organizations have different dwelling places or communicative practices. The good of organizational communication ethics rests within the very dwelling place we construct. The question, or the guiding question for organizational communication ethics is, well, what type of dwelling does a given organization want to be? What does it claim to be? And what type of dwelling do we function as? So within organizations, the concept of communication ethics is tied very closely with dwelling place. An organization's community of memory is the organization's conscience that provides a reminder of what has and has not worked and what actions did and continue to do for communicative life, together shaping a given dwelling place in a particular fashion. So community of memory is one way that we assess how we've done in a dwelling place and improvements that we might want to make in that particular dwelling place as it relates to communicative practices. So community of memory within an organization, how does a given story of an organization depend upon a community of memory that keeps alive the identity of a given place? So we'll break down the concept of community of memory to answer that question. First, it's similar to an organizational conscience retaining what it deems as good. It frames an organization's identity. A community of memory resides in the combination of what and how that gives shape to a good. What are the practices and how is the understanding, again, that gives shape to a good? A community of memory connects us to meaningful stories and others who contributed to those stories. It points to the kind of dwelling place and the form of communication practices that shape and reshape an organization dwelling place. And then finally, it's a collection of the past and an engagement with the future. In the chapter, Arnett et al. Introduced the concept of Bela's habits of the heart. In that piece of work, Bela talks about the fact that there's more to life than the autonomous self, and that we are stronger, we are more healthy, we are more vibrant as humans as we connect together in communities. And so our identity is more in community, or it's stronger in communities. Hence, the importance of community of memory for an organization, and particularly as its dwelling place and its communicative practices now and going forward. This work by James Booth, Communities of Memory on Identity, Memory, and Depth, can expand our understanding of community of memories. Beginning with the concept that our present and our future identity is shaped by the past. Booth talks a lot about identity. And we bear responsibility to embrace the past as custodians of the future. He expands the concept to say that we can't possibly be responsible for leading in the future and making this place a better place unless we understand our past. Booth refers to Aristotle to introduce types of identities: territory, race and ethnicity, and constitution. The Constitution and nationalist politics identities invites us to consider new regimes as separate selves. Booth describes Constitution and nationalist politics as being inferior to race and ethnicity politics or identities, because they often attempt to erase the community of memory for race and ethnicity identities. Booth talks about identity and accountability across time by referencing an example from 1992, François Mitterrand, who was then the president of the French Republic. He was asked to commemorate a July 1942 roundup of Jews at the Velodrome of the Divier in Paris, and he declined to do so because he did not believe that the current values and the current constitution for France, the people that were a part of that constitution and a part of the community of France, they weren't a part of the happening that occurred in 1942. And so he didn't believe that they should commemorate it or acknowledge it. Whereas Booth would say that is a part of your community of identity, the good and the bad, and you need to embrace it. Sameness from Aristotle. He talked about identity involves a temporal dimension, sameness of a person or community that undergoes change over time. In other words, the community is changing while still staying the same. And there always needs to be the remembrance of who we are to become and evolve to even expansion of our identity. The sameness or identity makes possible the recognition of a community as a single subject of attribution through time. We cannot simply pick and choose our own traditions. We cannot choose from among our stock of memories. We are given the totality of our past, whether as individuals or as a member of a community, and we must remember it and embrace it as part of our identity as a community. A quote here from Booth: remembrance depends on the fact that the past can be prefaced by the possessive noun our. However much we may have changed as a political body over time, those changes are scalar in relation to our past self. Now I'd like to play an excerpt from the Selma speech from President Obama that illustrates a very strong and powerful community of memory. There's another excerpt from the speech for the purposes of not making the video too long and too big of a file size that I can't upload to YouTube. I wanted to capture another excerpt from the speech that's very powerful, and it supports the point that we can, as we continue to hold on to the past to appropriate it, we do this not because we see it as an abiding part of our identity as a community across time, but because we can use it as a storehouse of lessons. It yields imperatives of the never again. Another reason cited by the author to embrace community of memory. Obama goes on in the speech to say, right now in 2015, 50 years after Selma, there are laws across the country designed to make it harder for people to vote. As we speak, more of such laws are being proposed. Meanwhile, the Voting Rights Act, the culmination of so much blood and sweat and tears, the product of so much sacrifice in the face of wanton violence, stands weakened, its future subject to partisan rancor. How can that be? The Voting Rights Act was one of the crowning achievements of our democracy, the result of Republican and Democratic effort. President Reagan signed its renewal when he was in office. President Bush signed its renewal when he was in office. 100 members of Congress have come here today to honor people who were willing to die for the rights it protects. If we want to honor this day, let these 100 go back to Washington and gather 400 more, and together pledge to make it their mission to restore the law this year. Therefore illustrating, and this very powerfully illustrates, how the community of memory commemorates the past while bringing it forward. And that's the responsibility that Obama shows here in applying the lessons from the past to the present. So finally, we asked the question, so what do we learn here? And so community of memory helps us to form our identity, helps us to shape the community practices that are part of our dwelling place by remembering collectively as a community our past, the good and the bad, and bringing that forward as responsible community members to shape our present and our future. Here are the references. Thank you very much.